Okay, one of you asked if I could do the spiders from that episode of The Mandalorian, but in Blender. I said, seriously, like, arachnophobia? Hello? Luckily, I'd seen the episode where these things are, so I gave it a go. Come along, maybe learn something, hopefully be entertained, and leave a better or a worse person for it. I opened up Blender. I'm still so freaked out by this. Spiders have 8 legs. Do you know what else has 8 legs? I don't know. Tell me in the comments. I started with the cylinder because it's round, and spiders are round, and I made it have 8 faces. Then I knifed it in half and I deleted half because it's easier to work with half and mirror it later, and I just like using knife because it's fun. I extruded the faces using mostly inset and scale, going back and forth between the individual origins and the bounding box center. This will be the body and the leg sockets. I scaled it up to make the sockets round and then moved on. For the legs, I just created a cylinder, scaled it, and then cut in some joint areas with loop cut and slide. I gave it 4 sections because they have sharp, spiky things on the end. Then I just rotated it, moved points around, rotated some more, and roughed out the shape of the spider leg as it would be standing still. Once I was happy, I rotated it into place and just duplicated, rotate, moved until I had 4 of these things placed. Then I subdivided it, checked it out, and joined the legs to the body with Ctrl-J. Once that looked okay, I mirrored it, moved the mirror above the subdivision modifier, and there, now I had a spider thingy. I moved it up so it sat on the ground, because spiders usually hang from the ceiling above my head, so this one I had power over, so the ground it was. Next, I extruded out its brain thing, and then on the bottom its mouth thing. It was really just box modeling at this point, using extrude, inset, loop cut, and slide, and move. I know lots of you have favorite modeling methods. This one just works for me, so you do you. Now that I had the spider base mesh, I duplicated it and hid the original in case I screwed up later. And then I brought it into sculpting, where I usually screw up, and, well, yeah. But to my surprise, it ended up sucking less than I thought it would at this point. So teeth were next, because how else would it eat people? For these, they were just cubes that were extruded, loop cut, scaled, and moved around. Then I just placed one and duplicated it, moved it, rotated, scaled, and repeated until it was full of these nasty, hideous, teethy thingies. Then I gave the body a shader, and the teeth had their own shader. I joined all the teeth together with Ctrl-J, and then applied the subdivision modifier so that it would match the body, and then I joined both together. Now this thing needs eyes so it can see out of the computer and plot against me. So for that, I selected rough squares of faces around the trunk, and then I used loop tools to make them into circle shapes. This loop tools thing is an add-on that ships with Blender. You just have to enable it under preferences, and it's really fun to play with. With the circle selected, I just extruded it inset and pulled until I got eye sockets. Then I made a sphere, placed it where I needed it, and then just copied it around for the other eyes. I made the original sphere in edit mode, so it was already joined to the spider mesh. Pretty slick, huh? I gave the eyes a black shiny shader, and then I moved along. Sculpting is great, but I don't want to use multi-mesh on this, so I just wanted something quick, so I used the displace modifier, assigned a marble texture, and I got this. I can feel your disappointment. My failure makes you powerful. I realized that I needed to make a vertex group for different displacements. I could do it in cycles at render time, but this lets me see it right in front of me without spinning my electric bill. I selected the points for the body, hit Ctrl-G to make a new vertex group, and then I chose that group in the existing displace modifier. Well, that worked. No, I had to take the power down, and yeah, that's pretty nice. Then I did the same thing for the legs, but excluding the sharp thingies. After playing with the settings, not too bad. I went in to fix a few places in there. Good. Next. Rigging time. The rig here is simple. It's so similar to my Meat Monster video that I actually went back and watched it because I hadn't done this in a while and I kind of forgot what I did. So I started by making a new armature. That gave me a bone. I'm such a dog. In edit mode, I extruded another one up first, then subdivided it. There, I had the body. Now for the legs. Shift A gives you a new bone in edit mode, so I used that, and then I moved it up. Then I positioned it, moved the top into the first joint, then extruded and moved the rest until it filled out the leg. I went back and adjusted where I messed up, and there. Now I just copied and pasted it around until I had 4. And I messed up again, so I rotated these into a better position for left and right. Then I named each set of bones for each leg with an L. That will let me mirror them later and save me some tedious work. L_A for the front, then copy it down the line and it auto-magically numbers it for you. I got to the last leg and I named it L_D, so like A, B, C, D. Then I tried to mirror it and it didn't work. I hate wasting time troubleshooting things that are supposed to save me time, so I just duplicated it and I rotated it. There, done. If I need to rename the bones later, so be it. Sloppy? Maybe. Probably. Whatever. This file will be up on Patreon all cleaned up for you, but we move on now. On to the cool part. IK is a really cool thing that's been around for like 20 years, so I'll use it here. In pose mode on this thing, I selected the second bone up from the bottom one of the legs, and then I hit Control-I. I chose a new empty object, and there. I got a nice empty at the joint, and a line pointing back to the start of the bone chain. It turns this cool lime color too, which I love. I did the same thing on all the other joints in the spider. You need to deselect and reselect to get the menu with the option for new empty object. If you don't see it, try selecting anything else like in the outliner or anywhere and then selecting the bone again. That's one way to get it to work. Once I had them all, I tested them and yep, they all worked. I should have tested just one first, but oopsies. To make this work better, I selected the start of all those bone chains, then the original bone, and then I parented. Now, the main bone will control the others. In edit mode, it lets me do this. Nice. But the spiky parts are rotating. Bad, 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 bad. To fix that, I went into pose mode, selected the offender, went into relations, and unchecked inherit rotation. Once I did that for all of them, they stay put. That's what I wanted. Lastly, I made a bone for the trunk, mouth, snooty thing and parented that chain to the main bone as well. Now they all move nicely. I added an empty in a circle shape, parented the whole armature to that, just shift dragging in the outliner, then made a second empty in a sphere shape and parented the main bone to that. Now I had a master controller for the whole object, and one for the main bone that's easy to grab and animate. I know, there are rigs for this. I'm just so fast at this, I don't care. The last thing to do here was parent the spider geometry to the rig. For that, I selected the spider, then the rig, hit Control-P, then chose automatic weights. This sometimes works well and you don't need to weight paint later. This was one of those times. On to animating. I was going to have one large spider and a bunch of smaller ones in this scene, so I started by just animating the first one. These are all going to run in a crowd over a hill at the camera a bit later, so I just did a simple crawl cycle. I looked up an ancient text tutorial on highend3d.com from a long time ago, and it's still there, and good. So I just animated all the legs on the ground, then another keyframe where they end for the cycle, then the middle where they all lift off the ground. Once I had them all keyed, I selected every other one and offset it by half. Now I had a simple cycle. I animated the main bone going up and down, then set the timeline to cycle by selecting all the things that moves keyframes, hitting Shift-E, and choosing Make Cyclic. This makes these keyframes cycle over and over and over and over again, like watching that one part of the 2022 Oscars. Now, to get two sets of spiders, I took this one and dropped it into its own collection called Spider. Then I made another collection called Spider Large, dropped in a duplicate of the spider hierarchy, and renamed things to large and small respectively, then wiped out the keyframes on the new large spider. I was going to hand animate this one for fun. I modeled out a quick environment with a ground and some sculpting, gave it a subdivision surface modifier, then positioned the large spider. This rig is fun and allows me to position this guy almost however I want. I didn't add in pole vectors though, as that would have helped and been cool, but I got away without them for this. I will have this rig up on Patreon with pole vectors for you, so you can fine-tune the joint positions and do whatever you want. The link will be in the description. Once I hand animated this thing, I got to the really cool part, the crowd of baby spider things. For this, I created a single vertex, called it GeoNodes, then went into the geometry node's workspace and deleted the input node, dropped in the ground object, and hooked it up to the group output. Then, I added a grid into the mix, made it 25 meters with 500 subdivisions. This will be the grid that the baby spiders run on. Right now it's flat. We need it to conform to the shape of the ground. That's easy. We can use a raycast node to project the vertices of the grid onto the ground, and it will conform. I dropped in a raycast node and hooked in the ground object to the target geometry, because the ground is the target we want the grid to conform to. Then, to tell the vertices of the grid what to do, we give it a set position node and hook that up to the geometry. Then we get the ground positions from the isHit and hit position wires, and yeah, it's a marriage made in, well, not heaven. Now I had a problem. the grid wasn't doing anything. I know why. It's not above the ground. The raycast has a -1 in the Z, so it's pointing down, but the grid is below the ground. That won't work. Duh. I added in a transform node after the grid, raised up the Z, and yep, it shrink wrapped onto the ground. If I offset it, there it is. Yay for small victories. Now, the really fun part. I distributed points onto the ground, lowered the density, added an instance on points node, then dropped the small spider collection in. Hooked it up to the instance and bam! Got a bunch of huge spiders. They were huge. So I added in a scale instance node, plugged in a random value into the scale, and played until I got some large ones and some smaller ones. Now if I animate the X value on the transform node, I can get them to move. Cool. I found a good spot for them, then added another transform node, just so I could break it out and have more control, and then gave it a driver using hashtag or pound frame, multiplied by a float until I was happy with the speed. Then, I lit this thing with 2 area lights and a soft fall-off. We were in a cave, so there probably wouldn't be any hard light sources unless somebody had a flashlight, so I made this as soft as I could with still getting some relief. I then textured it with some simple procedural shaders. Ideally, I'd grab pictures of lobsters and color correct them and use the shells for these, as they kind of had that look. But this is quick and dirty, and the procedurals allowed me to not have to worry too much about UVs at all when set to object in the shader. This is all up on Patreon if you want, the link is in the description. I wasn't liking the look, so I went back and fixed the teeth, and then sculpted a bit more. I also added some subsurface scattering to the body and teeth to give it just a bit more of an organic look. I shaded the ground to look icy but not too shiny, and used a rock PBR shader as a base. Then reworked the lighting, animation, camera work, and baby spider grid size until I was happier. I added some rocks and stuff, rendered it out, color corrected it in Resolve, and there. That's the process. Freaky. Hit like and subscribe if you got anything out of this. It helps me do way more of these. Thanks.